Who says you can't be the topic of conversation for all the right reasons? The Hyundai Tucson Hybrid pairs bold presence with advanced technology and sleek style. It's everything you didn't know you needed in an SUV and then some. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more.
New Vitamin Water Zero Sugar Pineapple Passion Fruit is packed with vitamins. Just like the amount of peas we packed in that sentence. It's packed like your tote bag. The one you stole from your ex. Or your overpriced half a studio apartment. Or extra rushed rush hour traffic. Packed like your calendar. Triple booked at 5, of course. Grab a Vitamin Water. Did we mention it's packed with vitamins?
Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, 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 come on in.
Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means, and that's Stefan Krajisnik. We are creeping closer and closer to Big Ten Media Days, closer and closer to the start of the 2025 season. So Stefan and I are going to spend the bulk of the next 2 weeks here deep diving into the roster. We did something similar last summer, Andrew and I, and we're doing it this year. It's called State of the Program. And it's a way to essentially assess where things are position by position heading into the season. Last year, I think, Stefan, you weren't here yet when Andrew and I did this, but it was under the guise of the idea of everything that Ryan Day had been, and his staff had been doing over the last 5 years and kind of led up to 2024 and kind of this now or never moment. This, if all the cards are in the middle of the table, let's go. The bulk of your core has come back and put off the NFL. Use the transfer portal at a higher level than at any other time during the Ryan Day era, both in the number of guys you've brought in, but also the caliber of players that you have brought in. This is kind of it. If you're not going to do it this year, you're not going to do it during this era. This year, this time around, I don't think it's quite that. I don't think it's as dire as it's now or never, right? It's a bunch of new all over the field, all over the place, all over the coaching staff. There's even some new. And so I don't think it's under that same tone of if Ohio State doesn't win a national championship, what do you do? But there is an idea of this is like step one of the next chapter of the Ryan Day era.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever really want to call it a reset because that doesn't really exist at Ohio State and the expectations are still high. And if you do call it a reset, it's kind of weird because this might be the preseason number one team. So it's kind of hard to dictate, but that's kind of what it feels like. It just maybe instead of reset, saying fresh start. Yeah, is maybe the best way to do it because there is so much new, and a lot of the names are on the roster maybe recognizable because they played a part in the 2024 season, but they're stepping into new roles. Caden McDonald was awesome in 2024, but he's a starter now in 2025. Julian Sayin was a great recruit. Well, he's a starter now in 2025. Well, at least we project, I guess. There's a lot of elements that go into kind of what 2025 represents for Ryan Day, and I think you hit it there. Like this is a new chapter in the Ryan Day era, right? Like how we're breaking up Ohio State. You talk about Woody Hayes era and Jim Tressel era and Urban Meyer era and now the Ryan Day era. Well, there's chapters within those. When we did our greatest Buckeye bracket, we talked about how Archie Griffin's time at Ohio State, you almost kind of forget that Woody Hayes was the coach because of how great Archie Griffin was. And that was kind of its own chapter. And you go through these phases and this is kind of a stark change for Ohio State from what 2024 was to 2020 to what 2025 and beyond will be. And I don't know if this next chapter is 4 years. I don't know how you would even define how long the last chapter was, but this is kind of something new now. And I think that's why we wanted to do this, is be like, all right, let's take a step back. And as much as we want to talk about, what will be the final score of the Texas game, or can Ohio State win a national championship, or what is the playoff going to look like in 2025? You kind of have to remind yourself that things in college football happen in cycles sometimes.
Yeah.
And recruits come in and some recruiting classes pan out over 4 or 5 years. Some don't. And things happen in these cycles where this feels like a new one is kind of beginning for Ohio State. Where does each position group stand? And are they prepared to be successful over the next X amount of years with that position.
And these cycles, at least since I've been covering college football, I think you and I think have essentially been covering college football for the same amount of time now. We have essentially seen the Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence cycle, right? Because as great as Joe Burrow was, I think if you're defining that cycle of like, oh, these two number one and number two players in the country, by year two, both of them are taking over the programs, yada, 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 and all those different things. Now, there's other characters and other chapters in it, right? The Joe Burrow chapter, the Jalen Hurts losing his job at Alabama and going to Oklahoma part of this, right? Devontae Smith winning the Heisman Trophy and on down the list there. And then you've got kind of the C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, DJ Uiagalelei chapter of Quinn Ewers chapter of, okay, now it's their turn and this is what they did. Then you've got kind of, well, everybody else is pretty good too. It's not just a quarterback conversation, right? I mean, when you look at Ohio, it's not kind of, yeah.
I mean, look at the guys on the cover. Yeah, you got JJ Ryan. Like this is, yeah.
Right. I think with quarterback, it's easier to name it that because obviously that's the most notable position here. And it feels like so many programs right now are pressing the reset button on quarterback in a way that I haven't felt personally since that 2020 class took over as starters in 2021. Bryce Young, DJ, and CJ. Part of it's because of the programs they were at. At that point, in whatever order you want to put them in, Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State were the kind of pride and joy of college football. So the fact that they went and got the three best quarterbacks in a 2020 recruiting class, and then they all sat for a year behind the old chapter before they took over is, I think, interesting to me. And it's something I want to get into at some point in this pod. But today we're doing quarterback. This is not going to be a nuanced conversation about how Julian or Lincoln can go win the job. We're going to have to do that so much over the first couple of weeks of fall camp that that'll get repetitive if we just do that for another month and a half here. And so what I want to do is have a conversation about overall expectations. I told Stefan this before we started recording. I got a bunch of stuff. Hopefully most of it makes sense. Hopefully it doesn't feel like I'm just throwing a bunch of stuff at you, but it's just a peek inside of my head and how I'm thinking about things heading into 2025.
So I think it's going to be a lot of stuff, and then we're going to come to like a simple conclusion.
Buckeye Talk. Well, you have a year and you have officially arrived. I want to start with Tavian St. Clair because there's no real expectation that he's going to play a meaningful snap of college football this year. And if he does, either he's had a hell of a summer, we are very wrong about the two guys in front of him, or something has gone wrong with the two guys in front of him. I have the numbers of snaps every single quarterback since Ryan Day became the head coach has played as a true freshman. Jack Miller played 10 snaps in 2020 in 2 games. CJ Stroud played 8 snaps in 3 games in 2020 and 1 meaningful snap against Clemson in the Sugar Bowl because Justin Fields got a head to his ribs and had to come out for a play. CJ Stroud played a play, handed it off to Trey Sermon, and Justin Fields came back in the game and finished that game. In 2021, Kyle McCord played 95 snaps in 5 games, 38 meaningful snaps, and I'm putting that in quotations because of the opponent, but CJ Stroud missed the Akron game. He was dealing with a shoulder injury at that time that finally kind of hit its hay there. So Kyle McCord stepped in as a starter and played 38 snaps. So 38 of his 95 snaps ended up being meaningful snaps that year. Quinn Ewers played 2 snaps in 1 game, and that was the Michigan State game. It's the only time he's ever played in an Ohio State football uniform. In 2022, Devin Brown played 15 snaps in 2 games, no meaningful snaps because he's QB3 behind Kyle McCord and CJ Stroud at the time. In 2023, Lincoln Kienholz played 60 snaps, 40 meaningful snaps, all against Mizzou because Kyle McCord had hopped in the portal. Devin Brown hurts his ankle, and so now Lincoln Kienholz has to finish that game. So 40 of his 60 snaps were meaningful, but also 40 of his 60 snaps weren't supposed to happen. But that's what happens when guys get injured. And then last year, Aaron Nolan didn't play any snaps, and Julian Sayin played 27 snaps in 4 games. So that's 217 snaps between 2019 and 2024 from true freshmen, and it's 27.1 per season for true freshmen. Over or under that number for Tavian St. Clair this year, when unlike Julian Sayin played 27 snaps as a true freshman in a 5 quarterback room. Lincoln Kienholz played 60 snaps in a 3 quarterback room. Devin Brown had 15 snaps in a 3 quarterback room. Quinn Ewers and Kyle McCord 2 and 95 in a 4 quarterback room, and then CJ Stroud and Jack Miller 8 and 10 in a 4 quarterback room. This is technically a 4 quarterback room now that they've added Eli Brick Handler, but it's more of a 3 quarterback room in terms of like guys who are eventually going to play football at Ohio State. Over or under 27.1 snaps per game this year for Tavian St. Clair.
I'll go with the over just because of what you said there. Because even last year, was it Tennessee that we saw Lincoln get a couple snaps? Was that what game it was?
It was. Yeah, because they played 4 quarterbacks in a playoff game.
I think I kind of just came to a realization about that.
Yeah.
Because at that point of the game, we're writing and we're trying to get down to the press conference. And I don't know if we really took in the fact that Lincoln Kienholz made an appearance in that game. I don't know. I don't know if it gets to that. Like, I don't think we see a 4th quarterback play maybe any snaps this year, which is why I go over. And I think because of how... See, now I might be going back on it because I think now you're more inclined, though, with a guy like Julian Sayin to give him some more reps, maybe in situations where we would have seen Will Howard come out.
Yeah.
So that number is kind of like, I'll still go over just because there's fewer quarterbacks in the room, but I would totally understand why someone would take the under if you think Julian Sayin just needs as many reps as possible because he's going to come out, he's going to play Texas, and then you're going to want him to get some reps against Grambling and Ohio before you kind of get into the bulk of your schedule again with Big Ten play. So I wish I had a more solid answer. I lean the over. I'll say over, but I get the argument.
I think the fact that you're struggling over this is why it's an important conversation because the first question is, how many blowouts do you think Ohio State's going to have? How many games do you think Ohio State wins by enough points that you see 3 quarterbacks?
Definitely 2 non-conference games, and I'll say, I'm looking at the conference schedule right now.
Like reasonably, I'm not saying that we're 100% going to see them, but if we see 3 quarterbacks play that day, you're not going to be shocked.
I'll say 5 games. I'll say Grambling, Ohio, home against UCLA, home against Rutgers, and at Purdue.
And I think 4 of those 5, because they're not going to waste his red shirt. So there's 5 opportunities, and they'll use 4.
And there's other games where, like, home against Minnesota, at Wisconsin, it could, bottom out for those teams, and Ohio State runs away with it. But
right,
that's tough road environments. So that's why I lean out of those 5, maybe 4 of them.
And the problem, though, is it's not just your starting quarterback who hasn't played a lot. And that's what it was in 2021, which is why Kyle getting a chance to get a start because CJ wasn't healthy ended up being pretty valuable because I remember after that Akron game, Ryan Day feeling like, well, I mean, we came into the season and we didn't have a single quarterback who would even throw a pass. And now we're 4 games into the season and we've had 3 guys play football. So you just feel a little bit better about where the room is. And so are they as quick to pull the trigger on Lincoln? Let's just say it's 55-3 against Ohio heading into the 4th quarter. Julian's day is done because you're also taking out the starting offensive line. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you just take out the weapons because JJ and Carnell are not going to be out there if it's up 55-3 and then in the 3rd quarter. What if you keep Lincoln out? If you throw Lincoln out there, but you keep your starting offensive line because it's a chance to get Lincoln some reps with the ones just in case something happens. And then taking into account clock rules aren't the same as they were back in 2021. Maybe there's just not enough time to get 3 quarterbacks out there, which is, to your realization, why it's so funny why they got 4 quarterbacks in against Tennessee. They were up that many points that they could get 4 quarterbacks out there very quickly. I'm with you. I think those are the 5 games, but I don't think I think he might play 3. I think they might try to get him in the first 2 non-conference games after Texas to get him some snaps, and then they probably find him a Big Ten game between those other 3 games you're talking about because he's so far behind. And those 2 are already, trying to play catch up a little bit here because they haven't played a lot of football. It's the combination of level of competition he played against in high school, but also his high school offense wasn't really all that similar to what Ohio State does offensively. And so this just seemed, if he does, I am almost more inclined, you said the over, I am more inclined that he plays, if I had to say, does he play 45 snaps or he doesn't play a single snap this year? And as drastic as that is, I think I would take he plays not a single snap this year than playing 45 plus.
And I think we had this debate, maybe not debate, but I think we've had this conversation last year where it's like, even in garbage time, we would see Devin Brown and we would say, well, why not Julian Sayin here just to get him some reps? That's not how coaches think. Coaches think who is number 2 on the depth chart. And if something happens to number 1, this guy's got to start a playoff game. This guy's got to start at Michigan. This guy's got to do whatever it may be. So he's got to be. So before you start thinking about, hey, get Tavian St. Clair some reps for 2026, your head is saying get Lincoln Kienholz some reps for 2025. So I'm with you. If you were to pick like drastic ends, I would probably lean toward the 0 as well and say Ohio State only has a few blowouts where you feel comfortable, taking out the starters. And in those few times, it's just Lincoln Kienholz that comes in. Having one of your non-conference games be as difficult as that Texas game changes things a bit, right? Because last year's 3 non-conference games were prime opportunities to get multiple quarterbacks into the game.
In 2020, it was Nebraska, which is a Big Ten game in a world where they only played 8 games. But Justin Fields handled his business, so we got to see Jack Miller. CJ Stroud played a few weeks later against Rutgers for the first time. In 2021, they played Minnesota and Oregon the first couple of games, and then it was kind of sloppy against Tulsa. So we didn't see anybody until Akron. 2022, you play Notre Dame first. You're definitely not seeing anybody, and then you play Arkansas State. That's your first opportunity to see other people, and then Toledo. This is very similar to that, where you got a really hard first game, and then you can get some reprieve there. So maybe we can see multiple quarterbacks. In 2023, we didn't see Lincoln. 2023 is different because Lincoln didn't get here until June, so we didn't see him until the Michigan State game. That's not even quarterbacks early enroll, and Lincoln did early enroll. And then
you also spent 2023. You also spent some of the non-conference figuring out who the starter is.
Right. So like you're not worried about your QB3 when you don't even know who QB1 is. And then last year, Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall. I mean, that's just opportunities to get multiple guys into the game like this. I don't know if Texas, OU, and Grambling State get you that same opportunity. I have one battle question for you because I agree. I'm ready for the questions. We get to bye week. Someone's gonna ask someone, whether it's us on the beat or just a fan's gonna be like, "How come Tavian St. Clair didn't get more snaps? We got to get him ready." It's like. Nobody cares about 2026. Nobody in that building cares about 20. Well, Mark Pantoni does because that's his job to worry about the future. Nobody else cares in that building. They're trying to get ready for 2025. Justin Fields got named the starter on August 19th. CJ Stroud got named the starter on August 17th. Kyle McCord got named the starter 4 days before the season opener, but with the caveat of Devin Brown was going to play. And Will Howard got named. I don't have the exact date, but it was essentially 10 days before the season opener. Are you expecting a similar timeline for this? Or are you still open to the idea that something happened this summer where one of these two guys, whether it's Julian Sayin or Lincoln Kienholz, because we're going to do the bit a little bit, had a heck of a summer, and then they spend the first week of fall camp locking this thing down?
I might take the answer of C, neither of the above, and say maybe we don't hear who the starting quarterback is until like the week of the Texas game, because I don't know if Ryan Day spent any of the spring thinking 1 versus 2, and I think he spent a lot of it thinking, let's see how good Julian can become. Let's see how quickly Lincoln Kienholz can be, what he can become. So I don't know if his brain has really spent much of the spring wired in the sense of who's winning this competition as opposed to how good each of these guys become. So I wonder if that means he tries to give himself some more time in August to spend talking battle. So I'll take the answer of this might be the latest we hear a starting quarterback get named in fall camp.
Howard was 15th, and that's the earliest. So
What did you count as the McCord versus Brown date?
It's 4 days before the season opener, which was on September 2nd.
He says McCord will start that game though.
Yeah. But he always does that. He's gonna always announce it of like, I told everybody in the room that just means you're the starter against this team, but we got to continue to compete in all those things. Yes, it was 4 days before the season opener on September 2nd.
Yeah, because he does his press conference on Tuesdays. So yeah, that might be when we hear Julian get named a starter, I think. So that'll be like August 25th, 26th.
Yeah, August. McCord's was August 20th, and so if we're gonna use that logic this year,
I think it's the 20th.
The game is the 23rd. Yeah, it would be okay. So you're marking down August 26th, which would be the second longest battle officially of the Ryan Day era. Do you think he's going to do what he did with McCord and Devin Brown? Do you think if they weren't playing, if the order wasn't Texas, Grambling State, and Ohio, and instead it was Grambling State, Ohio, Texas, do you think he would be doing with Julian and Lincoln what he did with Kyle and Devin Brown?
Maybe.
I don't. And that just is because, I mean, we feel the same way. We think we know who's going to be the starting quarterback. And this is less about talent and more about, is Julian like up for the job? Mentally, and like everything else that comes with being a starting quarterback at Ohio State, more than it is about, is he good enough to play football at Ohio State? I don't think anybody questions that at all. Okay, that's segment one. That's the most simple part of this conversation. I want to move into looking at some expectations. So let's take a break, and then I'll start throwing stuff at Stefan, and hopefully he can keep up here on Buckeye Talk.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks, or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Visit USAA.com/bundle.
Bundle savings are off total premium, not available in all states or in all situations. To qualify, auto policy must be active prior to property policy issue, subject to change. Restrictions apply. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
The Disney Plus Hulu Max bundle. It's the ultimate bundle for an unbelievable price. Plans starting at $16.99 a month. Get it and watch Marvel Television's Ironheart on Disney Plus.
I want to build something iconic.
A new season of The Bear on Hulu.
We can make people happy.
And The Epic, a Minecraft movie on Max.
Anything you can imagine is possible.
The Disney Plus Hulu Max bundle. Plans starting at $16.99 a month. All these and more streaming soon. Terms apply. Visit DisneyPlusHuluMaxBundle.com for details.
And we're back here on Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means, Stefan Krajisnik. It's State of the Program, Part 1, talking about Ohio State's quarterbacks. Ohio State's quarterback has technically not been the best quarterback in the Big Ten for 2 years now, since C.J. Stroud left, because Will Howard was second-team All-Big Ten, and Kyle McCord was third-team All-Big Ten. In 2023, A.J. McCarthy was the Big Ten quarterback of the year. In 2024, it was Dylan Gabriel who was the quarterback of the year, and the Heisman Trophy finalist. So technically, Ohio State has their quarterback position has not had the tangible expectations in terms of Heisman Trophy finalist, first round draft pick, national championship level quarterback. All three of those things in quite a long time here. Let's start with Lincoln because I think he's more simple. If he you said August 26th. August 26th, Ryan Day names Lincoln Kienholz the starting quarterback for Ohio State. Let's live in that world for a second. What is a fair expectation? Is his expectation for you still what the expectation would be if anybody was Ohio State starting quarterback, where it's Heisman Trophy caliber, first round caliber, national championship caliber quarterback, or is a guy whose recruiting pedigree is maybe a little bit different, his description of it's a little bit different? Does that change the way you view what you think his ceiling will be, but more importantly, what his ceiling should be?
I think, in my opinion, the expectation stays the same of what a starting quarterback should be at Ohio State. Like, I think if Lincoln Kienholz gets named the starter, it's because they think he can be Heisman caliber. Things. I don't know if I would say Heisman caliber. I don't know if I would say first round pick just because of what the NFL looks for. Like, I think his traits might be a little bit different in terms of arm talent. So I won't say that, but that has nothing to do with how good I think he could be. I think he's probably closer to like Will Howard than he is to CJ Stroud, if that makes sense. And I think Will Howard had an amazing season, was a Heisman contender, was not a first round pick because of traits and things of that nature. So I would still say, though, my expectations are high. If he is good enough to win this starting battle, because I think Julian Sayin can also be a Heisman-level guy playing at Ohio State. If Lincoln beats him out, my natural instinct, I think, will be, damn, this guy had a good fall camp. He won this starting job. I don't think it's going to be, oh, wow, Julian's not ready for this, so this guy might not be that good either.
Because there is an element here of both of these guys are on schedule. You know, if we're using for whatever, the only reason I'm bringing up recruit because it still matters because they haven't played football yet. So you still can take into account what they were as recruits. One was the best quarterback in his recruiting class. One was a guy in the mid 200s as a 4-star recruit. But the description of Lincoln Kienholz and the guy who was going to be the 2023 quarterback for Ohio State was developmental guy. First 2 years are about development, and by year 3, go be ready to win a job. He was a number 194 player, number 15 quarterback of the 2023 recruiting class. Okay, it's year 3. It got a little weird there because Kyle left and Devin got hurt, so he had to be thrown out there against Missouri in a Cotton Bowl he wasn't supposed to play in, which I do think, I will admit, is probably shaping some of my opinion of him because that's your first impression of him. And you try to put that at bay as much as possible because that was a situation he wasn't supposed to be in. And a lot has changed between a guy who had been on campus for essentially 6 or 7 months at that point versus a guy who's been here for 2 years. He's a very different football player, and I understand that, but it's still, your first impression really never leaves you. And some of the stuff we're going to get into in this part of the pod is part of the reason why your first impression can't ever leave you. Woody Hayes said it, if he's going to bite, he's going to bite as a pup. That doesn't mean Lincoln Kienholz needed to go look like a dude who could go win the Heisman and be a first-round draft pick and lead Ohio State to a national championship in a game he wasn't supposed to be playing in. But it means you see something that goes, okay, if this clicks, that's what it looks like. And I don't know if we saw that, but also I don't know if the environment was able to cater to any of that ever happening when you built an entire offense for a month around Devin Brown and then he gets hurt a quarter and a half into the game. And now you're throwing a guy out here with like 20 snaps for you coming into the game. So his run here is very similar to Kyle McCord's. I have some categories here because I went and looked at, and I'll save a lot of this other stuff for Julian Sayin, but I went and looked at 33 different quarterbacks since the 2019 recruiting class. And I'm dropping them in the buckets. And I'm still in the process of doing that. But the buckets are year one starters. So meaning they showed up on the campus and they won the job. And the context behind that is always what it is, right? Like Bo Nix starting at Auburn, Dylan Raiola starting at Nebraska. Yes, they're 5-star quarterbacks, but also they're going to programs who, it's like, who else you going to play, man? Right? It's the same thing Michigan's going through right now with Bryce Underwood. It's like, who else you going to play? So you might as well get started on your future early. You got and I used to talk about this with our former co-host, Doug Lamarice, all the time, the idea of the sit one, start two trajectory. The guys who, they know they're coming into a program where they're not going to play their first year. And it's simply because of what's already on the roster. Year one is about sitting and learning, and then they take over in year two. And there's a bunch of quarterbacks on this list that I have who are either we can place them on that trajectory right now or they've already started on that trajectory. Now, whatever happens after they get to year two and start, that's a different conversation. You've got it got weird, and I'm assuming you can understand what I mean by it got weird. You got the TBD, which is a lot of that is saved for some of the younger guys, but also some guys who were in like Devin Brown's position where he spent 3 years here, didn't play, and so he had to leave elsewhere. So you don't really have, it's kind of an incomplete grade right now. And then you've got the 2-year waiters, and that's what Kyle McCord was because CJ Stroud was already here and he was so good. Kyle McCord had to wait 2 years before he finally got to be the starter in 2023. That is what Lincoln Kienholz is doing right now. That's what Devin Brown was on. It's like, okay, I waited 2 years and now I get a legitimate chance. Devin Brown got a chance to compete in 2023 as well, but he sat for 2 years, and in 2024 maybe was supposed to be his year, but they brought in Will Howard. Lincoln Kienholz is a 2-year wait guy. So when I ask expectations, 3,170 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Is that success?
That's Kyle McCord's stat line.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think that's in the Ryan Day era. I think that's floor. And is floor a success?
No.
I think it has to be better than that. But I think back to my point though, I think if he beats out Julian Sayin, it's because they believe he can be better than that.
I hope that's the language. Because I do think in 2023, it felt like they couldn't decide on a starting quarterback, but it wasn't because, we have options. It's like, man, neither one of these guys are winning the job. And so he eventually just went with the older guy. When it happened in 2018, it's like, no, we got 2 dudes. And Dwayne eventually went and won that job, but there wasn't a wrong option, obviously. And in hindsight, it's even more of you see how there was not a wrong option here. Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the world now. And Dwayne Haskins broke a bunch of records and was a first-round draft pick. He unfortunately went to a crappy organization and things kind of went sideways there. Expectations. Kyle McCord did that as a former 5-star quarterback who had been QB2 his first 2 years here. So if Lincoln Kienholz, a borderline top 200 recruit, has that same stat line, you don't think it's success?
I don't think so.
Because at this point, it's no longer it doesn't matter what your recruiting ranking was. You're here now.
Right.
Compensation for
I mean, it's like at the end of his career when he was a Heisman contender, we weren't saying, Baker Mayfield, you can be a little bit worse because you weren't a 5-star prospect. It's like, no, you're the starting quarterback at Oklahoma.
Right. Okay. That's all, because that was the big thing I think with Lincoln is, did we feel like him winning the job changes our expectations for what quarterback play is going to be? Because
Yes,
some of it might be Julian's not what we thought he was.
Yeah, like you said, though, the language is going to be important. I predict that if Lincoln wins, it's because he did a good enough job to think that he could be pretty good. Like you say, I hope it's not because between the two, neither one is really good, so they're just going with the older guy. I don't think we get to that. I don't think Julian Sayin, based on what we saw in the spring game, can struggle so much that they say, hey, let's just go with the older.
Because if the language in fall camp starts sounding like 2023 language, and we get to this is our hypothetical date of August 26th and Ryan Day's name and a starting quarterback, and the language for 26 days has been similar to 2023 was 3,170 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Stops being the floor and starts being what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Versus
it goes to our conversation of like, what are your expectations for Lincoln if he wins this job? I think they're high because he won this job. But then you could have the inverse of, okay, well, what if Lincoln wins the job because Julian Sayin isn't a 5-star prospect? It's not because Lincoln is better than his rating. It's because Julian's not as good as his. That's a whole other conversation.
Yes, and that's it. Yeah. We think Lincoln winning the job is a big deal because we think that highly of Julian Sayin.
Yes.
If we stop thinking that highly of Julian Sayin and Lincoln wins the job, it just brings the floor. Okay, Sayin, and now I'll get more into this. I went back to 2019. And I looked at every quarterback who was considered a top 50 recruit in their recruiting class between then and now, up recently, and what they did, what they were, and what happened. Because it's a quarterback evaluation is such a crapshoot. Sometimes you're wrong, but sometimes you're right. And I want to kind of go through them all and kind of put them into these buckets as a way to talk about Julian Sayin. 2019, you had Spencer Rattler as a 5-star recruit. He goes to Oklahoma. He's a sit one, start two trajectory guy. He sits behind Jalen Hurts in 2019, and then he takes over as a starter in 2020, where he led the Big 12 in passing yards and passing touchdowns, 3,031 yards, 28 touchdowns, 7 interceptions on 67 completion percentage. Things got weird after that, but heading into 2021, he was considered the future number 1 pick in the NFL draft. He had a decent first year. It had some ups and downs, but he was still on a trajectory of, I sat my first year, I started for 2 years, and then I'm going off to the NFL as one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL draft. Things got weird after that, and partially because of a guy we're going to be talking about later, but he at least started on the trajectory of sit 1, start 2. Bo Nix at Auburn, 5-star, starts automatically. I throw him in the year 1 starter, and the context is because Auburn wasn't very good. And he threw for 2,500 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Jaden Daniels, he's a tweener. Bo Nix also did not end his career at Auburn. He played 3 years there and then transferred to Oregon, where he ended up being a first-round draft pick. So somehow, in some weird way, a 5-star quarterback ended up being a first-round draft pick.
It's almost like playing for Dan Lanning is better than it wasn't even Hugh Freeze. Brian Harsin. It was Brian Harsin. Yeah. Actually, I don't. It might not have even started with Harsin.
He played. I think he played for a few coaches while he was there.
Was it Malzahn?
Gus? Yeah. It was when he first got there. So okay, that explains that.
I actually think Gus Malzahn's a pretty good coach.
Jaden Daniels,
Auburn tenure so
was
hard.
The number 35 player and the number 3 quarterback. Sorry, you froze up there. Jaden Daniels starts at Arizona State. Threw for 2,900 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. He started that first year. COVID happened. So he's a start first year, but also the program he's at. Ends up at LSU, and that's where he turns into the Jaden Daniels we know today. That's 2019. In 2020, there's 33 guys, by the way, so this is going to be long. I apologize. Yeah, Bryce Young, DJ Uyunglele, and CJ Stroud. All 3 of those guys end up being sit 1, start 2 trajectory guys. They sit behind Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Fields in year 1, and then they all take over in year 2, and they're supposed to be the faces of college football. Bryce Young and CJ Stroud end up living up and maximizing that sit 1, start 2 trajectory. In year 1, both of them were Heisman Trophy finalists. One won the award. They spend 1 more year, and then they leave, and they're off to the NFL draft as the number 1 and number 2 picks in the NFL draft. DJ was a 2-year starter at Clemson before things got weird, and then he ended up transferring to Oregon State and then transferring to Florida State. But him and Spencer Rattler are the same as guys who started off on the trajectory. Things just went haywire because maybe they weren't as good as originally thought. 2021, you got Caleb Williams, who was also a sit one, start two trajectory guy. Technically, his first year, he's supposed to sit behind Spencer Rattler, and then he'll take over for Lincoln Riley as a starter in years 2 and 3, and then be off to the NFL draft. That's technically what happened. Now, granted, in the middle of that Texas game that year, he takes over the job, so he becomes more like what DJ Lagway was this past year. But he started the year learning from Spencer Rattler, and he does end up playing for Lincoln Riley for 2 years. It's just they move out to LA together. So I gave him starter in year 1.5. His first full year as a starter, he wins the Heisman Trophy with 4,500 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. He threw 21 TDs that first year. But again, original plan, sit, start two, I'm gone. Sam Heward, this is the 2021 class that had five-star recruits. I didn't throw Quinn Ewers there. You know this at this point. I always put Quinn Ewers back in his original class when we have these conversations. Sam Heward is at Washington, never really turns into much, and now he's at USC. He's expected to be their QB3 this year. JJ McCarthy, sit one, start two trajectory. JJ McCarthy is at Michigan. He sits behind Cade McNamara in 2021, then he takes over the next 2 years, and Michigan makes the college football playoff, and they win the Natty. And now he's a first-round draft pick. We talked about Kyle McCord earlier. This is a 2-year wait guy. Spends 2 years behind CJ Stroud, takes over in 2023. Probably should have been the starter again in 2024, but things went a little weird, so he ends up transferring to Syracuse, and now he's off to the NFL. The last two top 50 recruits from this class are Ty Thompson and Jake Garcia. Ty Thompson starts out of Oregon, never really does much, transfers to Tulane. He's a backup last year, and now he's playing tight end. And then Jake Garcia starts out at Miami, transfers to Missouri, and now he's at East Carolina. 2022, that's where you got Quinn Ewers, who's just so weird, man. He didn't start his first year of college football, but it's like a weird first year of college football. His first year at Texas, he started, though. And he threw for 2,100 yards and 15 touchdowns. He's a 3-year starter there. Cade Klubnik is another sit one, start two trajectory guy who just stayed an extra year. Sits behind DJ in year 1, starts in year 2, 2,800 yards and 19 touchdowns, and now he's back for his 3rd year here. But he starts out on that trajectory. Connor Wegman at Texas A&M doesn't do much, and now he's at Houston. Ty Simpson is Lincoln Kienholz as a 5-star recruit. Well, he's more like Devin Brown, actually, except he didn't transfer. He spent 3 years at Alabama, where he sat behind Bryce Young, and then Alabama's quarterback last year. His name is escaping me. Jalen Milroe. He sits behind Bryce and then Bryce Young for a year, and then Jalen Milroe for 2 years. And now it seems like Kalen DeBoer is ready to give him the job over the guy Austin Mack, but I guess we'll see. The way they were talking at SEC meetings, it seems like Ty Simpson's in the lead to win that job, though. Drew Aller, sit one, start two trajectory. He just stays an extra year, but he spends his first year sitting behind a veteran quarterback at Penn State, and then he takes over in year 2. He throws for 2,600 yards and 25 touchdowns. Those 25 touchdowns, I believe, actually led the Big Ten, if I'm not mistaken. And now he could have gone pro this year and maybe would have been a first-round draft pick over Jackson Dart. But he decides to come back another year, and maybe he'll be a first-round draft pick next spring. I guess we'll see. Walker Howard starts at LSU, doesn't do much, transfers to Ole Miss, and now he's at Louisiana. And then you got Devin Brown, who spent 3 years at Ohio State, lost 2 quarterback battles, and now he's at California. And now you get into 2023. I'll go a little quicker here. Arch Manning is a 2-year wait guy, spends 2 years behind Quinn Ewers, and now he's going to be the starting quarterback this year. Nico Iamaleava was on the sit one, start two trajectory. The business of college football happened. He sat behind Joe Milton in 2023, takes over in 2024, gets Tennessee to the playoff, and is expected to be a guy in the Heisman race this year, and then the business of college football got in the way. Threw for 2,600 yards and 19 touchdowns last year, and now he's at UCLA. But he still might be on the sit one, start two trajectory, because he might be in the NFL after this year. He's just a starting quarterback at 2 different locations. Dante Moore is a little bit of a got weird and a year 1 guy, because he goes to UCLA. He's a starter for Chip Kelly. Leaves, heads to Oregon, where then he sits behind someone, and now he's going to be the starting quarterback for Oregon. So somehow he's in 3 different buckets. But that 1 year at UCLA, 1,600 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. Jackson Arnold, sit one, start two trajectory to start off. It's just he ended up not being very good. Sits at Oklahoma behind Dylan Gabriel for a year. Ironically enough, 2 of these quarterbacks from 2023 have sat behind Dylan Gabriel. Sits behind Dylan Gabriel in year 1, takes over last year, 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And now he's at Auburn. And then Malachi Nelson's the ultimate got weird from this group. Started out at USC, where he was expected to sit behind Caleb Williams for a year and then take over in 2024. Things went like kind of haywire. He transferred to Boise State, excuse me. Transferred to Boise State, and now he's at UTEP. Which gets us to 2024. Julian Sayin, we are expecting Julian Sayin to be a sit one, start two trajectory guy. Fair?
Yep, I think that's fair.
DJ Lagway is a sit one, start two trajectory guy who has a little bit more of the Caleb Williams description because Florida's a mess. But he's a sit one, start two trajectory guy, right?
Yeah, he was a true freshman last year, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the plan was for him to sit last year because of Graham Mertz. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Dylan
There was
Raiola.
also injuries, poor play, a bunch of stuff.
Right. Which is why, but still, the expectation going into the year was he's going to sit and learn as a true freshman, and he's taking over in 2025, which is, at the end of the day, what ended up happening here. He just got a chance to play a little bit, so he threw for 1,900 yards and 12 touchdowns. Dylan Raiola is a year one starter because he's at Nebraska trying to help Matt Rule get that program off the mat. 2,800 yards, 13 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. 2025, these are just my expectations for all these guys and where they're at. I think Deuce Knight might win the job. I mean, of the guys here not named Bryce Underwood, maybe he has the best chance of just being Bo Nix 2.0 for them as a true freshman.
He ended up at Auburn, right?
Yeah.
He can't keep up.
I know.
Yeah, they did get Jackson Arnold, though, so he might be a sit one, start two guy.
Yes, because at worst, maybe Jackson Arnold is like the bridge QB for them, and then Deuce Knight takes over next year.
Maybe Jackson Arnold ends up being their Bo Nix, except he sucked at Oklahoma and now will be good at.
Yeah.
Because Jackson Arnold also sat behind Dylan Gabriel, so you can give him a lot of money. So there's some connections between the three there.
So Deuce Knight's a TBD guy then, because he could be sit one, start two, 2-year wait. Maybe this gets weird because he was committed to Notre Dame for a while. Julian Lewis, I think, is a sit one, start two guy because they brought in Liberty's quarterback at Colorado, and I think he's going to be the starter there at the end of the day. So
maybe he has like a DJ Lagway type path where we end up seeing if Colorado's not great this year, maybe he comes in, but I would lean towards sit one, start two.
Yeah. Hassan Longstreet at USC. They've got the Maeva kid, and I don't know what his eligibility is. So Hassan Longstreet, who was a number 25 player, number 4 quarterback. There were 5 5-star quarterbacks in this 2025 recruiting class. He might be
on the sit one, see what happens to Lincoln Riley path.
Yeah, that might get weird very quickly. Tavian, he's a 2-year guy. Let's check back in 2 years because of the guy ahead of him is a sit one, start two trajectory guy. I think Keelan Russell also might be in the DJ Lagway, Caleb Williams it's a sit one, start two trajectory. But if Ty Simpson or Austin Mack are just fine, and it's like, let's say it's October and Keelan Russell starts looking the part as a number 2 player in the country, then I'm going to say sit one, start two trajectory, but I'm also not going to be shocked if we get to the playoff and Keelan Russell has somehow become an Alabama starting quarterback.
But also wouldn't surprise me if he was a sit two guy, because if Mack pans out.
Right. So he's all over the board. And then Bryce Underwood, I mean, look, inevitable, man. He's a year one inevitable type of situation. So, okay. So of that list, here's the guys that we think that were or we think are going to be sit one, start two trajectory guys. Spencer Rattler, Bryce Young, DJ Uiagalelei, CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, JJ McCarthy, Cade Klubnik, Drew Aller, Nico Iamaleava, Jackson Arnold, DJ Lagway. From all that's all across the board, right? You've got start two, sit one trajectories that are like, oh, no. They sat for a year, then they took over, and they were immediately some of the best. Like CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Caleb Williams, they sat for a year and then were immediately some of the best players in college football. Spencer Rattler was fine. But then you've got Cade Klubnik, who was fine. You got Nico Iamaleava, who was fine. Then you got Jackson Arnold, who sit one, start one, and now he's in the portal at another comp. Like, what from this, where on the scale of these guys, best case scenario, worst case scenario, do we think Julian Sayin is?
Yeah, best case, I think, is probably the Bryce Young. Sit one and be a Heisman winner right away. It's amazing how quickly Bryce Young became as good as he was. And I think that's kind of the ceiling for a guy like that. A sit one, start two guy, I think, is exactly what Bryce Young was able to do. I think in Julian Sayin's situation, with everything around him, with Ryan Day's track record, I think his worst case is the Cade Klubnik route. And so Cade his first year, he threw 100 passes. I mean, he got some playing time, but when he came in 2023, full-time starter, 2,800 yards, 19 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, like that. And that might even be lower. That's just like the closest I can find for. I think what Kyle McCord was in 2023 is probably the floor for Julian Sayin. Mm-hmm. So this would be a little bit worse than that. So I don't, at least statistically speaking. So, but out of the guys we talked about, I think Bryce Young ceiling, Cade Klubnik floor.
Which way do you lean right now in those hyperbolics? If you had to choose one of those two hyperboles, which one is he?
Probably Bryce Young. I just don't imagine a world in which you have Jeremiah Smith and your quarterback only throws for 2,800 yards.
No, for sure. Which is why we're saying that the floor with Kyle McCord is Kyle McCord, where he threw. I mean, he had Marvin Harrison Jr. So 3,100 yards and 25 touchdowns. That's just kind of the floor of what it is. It doesn't mean he maximized the offense. It just means that there's a floor level for what this offense could be, and that's why let's take the numbers away. And let's talk context. Because again, this is all what these stated. It's going to be context and expectation. Bryce Young throwing for almost 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns is because Bryce Young was that good. TJ throwing for 4,400 yards and 44 touchdowns is because he was that good. Caleb Williams, 45 and 142 is because he was that good. I do think there is a difference between, like, those are the type of numbers you put up when it's because of you. Versus it's because of your environment. Because Caleb Williams was that, I mean, he had a first-round wide receiver. He had the reigning Biletnikoff winner with him. So it's not like Caleb Williams was just throwing the scrubs. Bryce Young had J-Mo and John Mechie. So it's not like he was throwing the scrubs. DJ Stroud's entire wide receiver room has heard Roger Goodell say their name. So, you know, it's not like all of those guys had healthy environments. Because even J.J. McCarthy, I know his numbers are not the same as those other guys, but the NFL told us J.J. McCarthy was that good. It's just Michigan's offense isn't designed in a way to put up heavy passing numbers because they run the ball so much. So I'll even throw J.J. in that category. There is a difference between your quarterback being good because the environment is good versus your quarterback being part of the reason the environment is good. And you are leaning towards the direction of, we are going to, maybe not by the end of the Texas game, because that's too early in the season. And even with Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, I don't think anybody was 100% stamped that Bryce Young was one of the best quarterbacks in college football after they played Miami. I know nobody thought CJ Stroud was one of the best quarterbacks in the country after that game against Oregon. So maybe that's not fair. But we get to Saturday, August 25th. We are chilling. It's the second bye week. Ohio State has 2 weeks to prepare for Penn State. Is your expectation, realistic expectation, that if Julian Sayin is what we think he is, 7 games into the season, Julian Sayin, if you and I got on that Monday pod heading into the bye week and said, hey, we're going to rank the top 10 quarterbacks in college football, Julian Sayin is closer to 1 than he is 10, or not being on the list.
So you're asking me the bye week after the Ohio game or the bye week before the Penn State?
Yeah.
Okay. So October. I think it's September 25th. So October 25th. No, you're good. So going into, I think that we could realistically get there. I would lean toward that we will get there as opposed to we won't.
It's going to hurt JJ's Heisman Trophy chances, but
I know.
It sucks, man. But I think I agree. And but did you see the way we're talking about him versus Lincoln Kienholz? And part of that's because of the way I guided the conversation. But it's just, both of us, it feels like with Lincoln Kienholz, it's like, well, yeah, this is the expectation. You're supposed to be a good football player. Fine. Kyle McCord was a good football player, but it wasn't enough. Versus with Julian Sayin, we immediately went towards, hey, do we think he can be CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Caleb Boyd, like other guys who were 5-star recruits who spent their first year learning behind a quarterback who was pretty darn good, and now it's your turn to take it over, and you've got a pretty good environment to house you. You should be one of the 5 to 10 best quarterbacks in college football 7 games into your career.
Yep, I think that's the expectation.
Okay, let's take a break because you said the things I thought you were going to. Well, I thought you were going to say. I had 2 ways I wanted to go with the third segment, and it depended on how you talked about Sayin and Lincoln Kienholz, and you went left. So let's go left with this when we come back from the break here on Buckeye Talk.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
I think you're on mute. Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
We're back here on Buckeye Talk. Steven Means and Stefan Krajisnik. What I'm thinking about he went left is not that he went weird. It's just, it's like, okay, it's almost like those, here's the question. If yes, do this. If no, do this. You said this, so we're going to do this here. Did you think Will Howard being elite in 2024 was an absolute necessity for Ohio State to win a national title?
No. I think the area he ended up being elite in had nothing to do with arm talent, speed, things of that nature, which is, I think, what that team needed.
I think if I went through every year and said, was it absolutely, positively necessary that Ohio State's quarterback be one of the 7 best quarterbacks in college football for this team to be successful? I think 19 is a yes and a no. It's a yes because Justin Fields got there. It's a no because I think the defense was so good and the running game was so good that if Justin Fields wasn't peak Justin Fields, I think they would have still been okay. I think Justin Fields, in hindsight, if you go back and look at that season, it's a little more Will Howard than I think people realize in terms of you just got to be ready to do it if the moment calls for it, but we're not going to ask you to do it 40 times a game. And I know that's a big number. 2020, yes, I think Ohio State needed its quarterback to be awesome every single week because look what happened in the weeks it wasn't. When Justin Fields kind of went haywire in the second half of Indiana got back in the game. When Justin Fields was kind of off because he was missing some of his weapons in the Big Ten championship game, look what happened. Nebraska flirted with you until Trey Sermon went supernova. When he was awesome, ask Nebraska how it felt to see Justin Fields be awesome. Ask Michigan State how it feels to see Justin Fields be awesome. Ask Clemson in the Sugar Bowl what it feels like to have Justin Fields be awesome. Because you even add that in. The reason I said the Michigan State game is because you're missing like 4/5 of your offensive line because of COVID. So they needed your quarterback to be on it. 2021, whether it was fair or not, Ohio State needed C.J. Stroud to be on it because the defense wasn't very good and they couldn't run the ball, but they could throw it. So he had to be on it. And 2022 had to be on it. The defense was better, but it still gave up all types of explosives. And you lost Jackson Smith-Njigba. And you could sometimes run the ball. So as good as CJ was against Georgia, CJ had to be that good against Georgia. 23, I think the answer was yes. It just wasn't. Because it's not all on Kyle McCord, but if CJ Stroud's a quarterback, I think they beat Michigan that.
Yeah, the answer is yes, definitely, especially going into the season.
Yeah. 2024, I agree with you. I think Will Howard and so 24 and 2019 are
you have to agree with me. We spent a month talking about how he doesn't need to be Superman.
I know. He's gone and we're still saying, hey, you don't need to be Superman. He's like, dude, I did it already. Move on.
If he wins his next starting job, he's gonna have to be Superman.
Yeah, that's a different conversation. Though he plays for the Steelers. So the Steelers are like Tomlin is like Doc Rivers. Both of them are constantly good enough to get their team to be good enough to lose to somebody who's actually good.
That is fair.
It's Tomlin. You know what the tree is? And they're all bald. Doc Rivers and James Franklin are all the same coach.
This is fair. Yeah, because like going 10-2 at Penn State, it's kind of becoming like going like a 9-8 with the Steelers and losing in the first round.
Yes. Or like Doc with the Clippers where it's like, hey, we got to the second round and now we're topping it.
Yeah. Blow a 3-1 lead. You didn't give him credit for winning those 3 games though. That's kind of how James Franklin, this all works.
It's like, hey, man, you didn't give me credit for the other 10 wins. Yeah, you didn't play anybody. That's the point. So 24 and 19 are the only years where I don't think it was absolutely dire necessary that Ohio State's quarterback play be, if you're not one of the 7 best quarterbacks in college football, this team's probably not going to be successful. And that's because the environment's around it. There's a chance that you might get both things. You might get, which is what 2019 was. You had both. You had a top 7 quarterback in college football, but you also had one of the 3 best rosters in college football, so it really didn't matter. But it's so young and so early, and you have such a big-time game starting up that I think maybe it's fair to say Julian Sayin's got to be on it from day one. No mistakes, because it's got to be that way in 2025. Do you think this is a year where we're talking about Julian Sayin, like by October, we should be viewing him as one of the 5 to 7 best quarterbacks in college football? Is that absolutely necessary if Ohio State wants to compete for a national championship in 2020?
I don't think so because he has a different set of criteria to lead a team to a national championship. If he loses one game because he's not ready to go week 1 or if he's not even ready to go November 1st against Penn State and he still hasn't reached his peak, this team can still make the playoff and win a national title. So the criteria has changed a little bit. But I think despite all the talent on this team, so I'm gonna kind of cheat on your answer here a little bit.
Okay.
I think despite all the talent on this team on both sides of the ball, and some of it being young, some of it being experienced, Sonny Styles, I already consider Jeremiah Smith experienced because he started a full season's worth of games. Caleb Downs is experienced, like whatever. Despite all that, there will be a point, whether it be a must-win regular season game or a playoff game, at some point, I think Julian Sayin is going to have to be the best player on the field and make plays that aren't just throw it up to JJ, he'll make the play. So at some point, there will be a game where I think Julian Sayin has to be the 5-star quarterback that we think he is. So can Ohio State win a national title? Let me say this. Can Ohio State be really good, make the playoff, and compete for a national title if Julian Sayin isn't elite? If he's not Bryce Young level? Yes, I think they can still accomplish all that. Do I think they win a national championship if he never shows kind of that ceiling? I don't think it happens. I think at some point we're going to have to see it. If it's not for a game, it might have to be for a couple game stretch. Because the schedule is too tough to just say, get the ball to your receivers and you're going to be fine. Like he's going to have to make plays at some point against these teams that they play, because Ohio State's wide receivers are stacked. There's a lot of good secondaries that they're going to play. There's a lot of good defenses that they're going to play. He's going to have to be, he's going to have to at some point be something similar to like the heights that we saw from Bryce Young. It might not be 5,000 passing yards, but it might be a play or two when your team absolutely needs it, where you say, whoa, he looked like CJ Stroud when he did that.
And for me, it's not even about they might face some good defenses. I just think the offenses on the schedule might be a little bit better too.
Yeah.
Because people already think Arch might be the best quarterback in college football. You and I think it's DJ Lagway, but people already think that. So what if he is that? And I've probably publicly had some big pushback on that. Like, how do we know that? Is it just because he's a Manning, or do people think he's actually good? Let's find out on August 30th. Okay, we're living in hypotheticals right now for this podcast. What if Arch Manning is that good? So Julian Sayin's first career start is against another guy who is ready to box and ready to throw blows
against a defense that we think is going to be worse than it was last year.
Still good, but young and no give, because your first game is a top 5 opponent. Right. So if they give up 3 explosive plays for touchdowns against Texas, I'm not going to sit here and go, oh no, there's something wrong with the defense. I'm going to go, yeah, that's about right. Jalen McClain was out of position here, busted coverage, or Malik Hartford was out of position here, or maybe Jermaine Matthews got beat here, or they threw Aaron Scott out there, he got beat here, or somebody didn't fit the run the right way, and so now it's an explosive 30-yard touchdown run, right? Arvell Reese is good, but sometimes he overshoots his gap a little bit. It's just young guys who have never been in this position before. Edric Houston and Cade McDonald are awesome, but the defensive tackle depth isn't there. So now they're on their 35th snap of the game, and it's the middle of the third quarter, and they're just gassed, right? It's just all, and I don't think any of it is alarming. It's just young team with only 3 guys on defense who have ever played the level of meaningful snaps that they are going to play on August 30th. If they make mistakes, I'm not shocked. And you know who has to make up for mistakes when the defense makes mistakes that give up points? The offense. You know who has to make up for mistakes when the offense can't score? The defense. That's what complementary football is. CJ Stroud against Oregon had to keep making up for the defense's mistakes. The problem is, offense as a whole wasn't good enough. So they only scored 28. I don't think it's going to be that dire to where we get to the end of the game and Julian Sayin's thrown 54 passes like CJ Stroud did. But if he throws 35 to 40 passes, it's not going to shock me. And that's a lot of passes to be on when you haven't technically played meaningful football since high school. I think in 2025, they need their quarterback to be one of the 7 best quarterbacks in college football. And that doesn't mean he has to get the, and I think the Texas game is going to reinforce that. It doesn't mean he has to be that by the end of the Texas game. I don't even think that's a fair thing to say right now. Let's go watch some fall camp practices and we might change that. But I think the Texas game is going to reinforce for both teams. Your quarterback got to be a dude this year. It can't just be our defense is awesome and we ran the ball and that's just kind of it. Which means by the time we do this again, because Illinois has got a pretty good quarterback. We've talked about that, right? Mm-hmm. But Ohio State also just might be talented enough that they might escape with a win anyway. But by the time you get to that second bye week, we need to be talking about Ohio State starting quarterback and Heisman conversations. And all right, well, Julian's got one more year after this, and he's gone off to the NFL 2027. We're looking at you, Tavian Sinkler. I think that's the type of year it calls for Ohio State when you look at its schedule, but then you also look at what its roster is.
Yeah, I think it's, we talk about ceiling and floor. We know what the ceiling is for Ryan Day quarterbacks. Dwayne Haskins did, what Justin Fields did, what CJ Stroud did. We know what the ceiling is, and we think the floor is what Kyle McCord did. And if you find yourself somewhere in between, if Julian Sayin in 2025 is somewhere between Kyle McCord and CJ Stroud, anything in between there is probably one of the 7 best quarterbacks in college football. Because Kyle McCord, despite how ugly it looked at times, probably wasn't far off from being considered a top 10 quarterback that season.
Right.
It wasn't far from it.
Right.
It might sound crazy to say because he didn't get there, but it wasn't that far from it. And if we think that's the floor, and Julian is definitely going to be above that, I think, top 7 I think is very reasonable. Because top 7 isn't even like Heisman. I'm trying to think of who the 7th best quarterback last year was. Like Curtis Rourke?
Probably.
I think that's attainable. And I think that wins Ohio State or gets Ohio State in the conversation for a national title.
But firmly. And when we say top 5 to 7, closer to 1 than he is 7.
Yep. Probably.
And that's the language that's different for me. Because you're right. Kyle McCord wasn't far off. But the gap between what we're talking about versus where he was on the list, that's where it's far. It's the difference between just being a really good quarterback and being an elite, game-changing quarterback where a team doesn't really have an answer for it if you're on that day.
So I guess this is one of those, as we mentioned early, we're going to say a lot and then maybe come to a simple conclusion. Would you say more often than not, when Ryan Day is a coach at Ohio State, you probably need the quarterback to be close to elite? Because what was the exception? Will Howard last year?
And maybe Justin. And Justin got there anyway, so it's irrelevant. So that's great segue. I guess let's build the room then and figure that out. How often, because I don't know if it's a fair expectation. Because even with Ohio State had 3 straight first-round draft picks. I think Lincoln Riley in general had 2, then a second-rounder, then a guy transfer, and then a first-round draft pick. Alabama had, I think, 3 in a row. No, they had 2 in a row with Mac Jones. No, I'm sorry, they had 3 in a row. 2 of Mac Jones, Bryce Young. But I don't.
But what was Jalen, second round?
Yeah.
Yeah, he started at Bama.
Yeah, half Bama. It's that one's hard because it's the reason he was a second round draft pick and is currently the Eagles quarterback is because he went to Oklahoma, but he was at Bama and he probably would have got drafted still if he stayed at Bama. So some of his is situational, but I don't know if past 3 it's, hey, we're just gonna have a first round quarterback every single time at bat. I just ran down every single quarterback who's been a top 50 recruit since 2019. As many success stories as there are just as many. There's a dude who was the number 39 player, number 6 quarterback in his recruiting class, and now he's at Tulane playing tight end. So it's a crapshoot. So ideally, I think it depends on what the roster looks like. I think the younger and the less experienced your roster is, the more emphasis there has to be on your quarterback being special. Versus when you have a defense like they had last year, you have 2 running backs like they had last year. When you have an offensive line that they had last year pre-injuries, where your left side was first-round draft pick, Remington Award winner, and you have the receivers they had last year, and even the tight ends to an extent, then it's not necessary. So I guess let's 4 quarterbacks. Describe them from a recruiting ranking standpoint and what their expectations are and how their development goes at Ohio State.
What the average Ohio State room should look like?
Yeah.
I think there should be a 5-star guy somewhere in the room.
Mm-hmm.
I think there should be a 4-star kind of developmental guy, maybe even a 3-star on some rankings, but probably a composite 4-star. I feel like I'm starting to describe this year's room. I think there should be a veteran, whether that be, I think the easiest way to accomplish that is probably the Jebbia brick handler route, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can be, I think Devin Brown was a veteran in the room last year. He'd been around. But, that can be another 4-star guy that maybe the development just either doesn't work out or their timing doesn't work out. And probably another young guy, 4 or 5-star, who's, you think in a couple of years going to compete for the starting job. I think last year we probably would have said that was Aaron Nolan before Julian Sayin came in.
Yep.
I think highly rated guy, ready to go, developmental guy, a veteran guy, and a highly rated freshman.
I would say, I like that. I'm going to tweak it a little bit for mine. Old guy. I'm trying to figure out how to say this. There should be 2 guys who think this is their year to be the starter. Old guy.
Yeah, you typically have that every year. Or you've had it at least since CJ Stroud.
Yeah, right. Unless you have a returning starter, there should be two guys in the room who are looking and going, this is a young guy who is a year away from being in the, okay, this is my job conversation, which is typically going to be a true freshman. Old guy. Now, I do think, let me cycle this. In a 4-year cycle, what should your starting quarterback? One of those years, you're going to have an old guy. Maybe you went out of the portal and got him. You're going to have the Will Howard.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the era that we live in now, 4 years for that is probably the right thing.
And you're maybe hoping that the Will Howard year falls on a year where your roster is so old that it's the reason you had to go get the Will Howard, because, yeah, you like your young guys on the roster, but you got to be really sure because you got a chance to really do something here. So let's go get the old veteran.
And you kind of take into account someone not panning out at some point. I know right now it might be hard to picture Tavian St. Clair not panning out, but if he doesn't, we could say 2027, Ohio State has to go find a Will Howard.
Yeah. So when I say old guy, he can be either the Jebbia brick handler or it needs to be Will Howard. Like, I don't think you can have an old guy who's like, okay, I don't think you can bring in a guy who's been in college football for 3 years and he comes here and loses the job and he's here thinking he's going to win the next year, because that's going to throw off stuff. So I think you have to have that. You have to have the Lincoln Kienholz. I think he is vital to all of this. You have to find the quarterback who is okay with it might be 2 or 3 years before you start or even have a chance to start, because it's going to help you keep your room together. Because if you have a room full of 5-star recruits who all think they're going to play in year 2, it's going to be a long spring for Ryan Day and Billy Fessler. That's a lot of legwork to constantly keep trying to find new quarterbacks. And you don't really build a room or a culture that way. You just kind of have bodies warming up chairs. And I don't think Ryan Day wants that. So you have to find that guy who sees the bigger picture. And Lincoln Kienholz and Devin Brown have both been that guy. Now, when they get to year 3, if they win the job, they win the job. And if they don't, then they don't. And then you go from there, right? Kyle McCord won the job in year 3. Devin Brown didn't win the job in year 3. We'll see with Lincoln Kienholz. Devin Brown didn't win it in year 3 and saw he probably isn't going to win it in year 4, so he left. But I think if you get a guy in here who understands it's going to take 2 or 3 years, even if he ends up playing somewhere else, that's a success story. Devin Brown, from a program quarterback building room standpoint, he's a success story. Now, for his own individual development and the fact that he was never Ohio State starting quarterback, obviously, that's tough. But I think from the bigger picture room development, that's a success. And then you got to have a dude. And sometimes I think these, just like we were talking about earlier with the buckets, you can fall into multiple buckets. Like Will Howard was your transfer older veteran, but he was also your dude. Justin Fields was a transfer. He's also your dude. Sometimes CJ Stroud, the guy you recruited, that's your dude. But those descriptions have to be in your room. However way you go about getting it, those need to be the 4 descriptions in your room on a given year basis, because it gives you upside, it gives you future, and it gives you security if something happens. Last question. So Ryan Day, to my knowledge, his contract is through 2032.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah, January 2032. So the 2031 season is his last year of his contract. I'm assuming that this dude's going to probably get another extension at some point. But right now, 2032. Right now, his tenure at Ohio State is scheduled to be from 2019 to 2032. He already has 2 first-round draft picks as the head coach, so I'm not counting Dwayne Haskins. You got Julian Sayin as a 5-star on the roster, Lincoln Kienholz as a 3rd-year guy on the roster, Tavian St. Clair as a 5-star kid on the roster, and then Brady Edmonds, who's like a borderline 5-star in a recruiting class already. It sounds like they're going to find another Lincoln Kienholz-style quarterback in 2026. We just don't have a name for that. So that means I would assume in 2028 they also have a highly rated guy. And then 2029 will be the next time they get the Lincoln Kienholz guy. He's got 2 first-round draft picks right now. How many more first-round draft picks at quarterback between now and 2032?
I'm going to say 2. I think one of Julian or Tavian will be. So that's looking at 2027 draft and then like 2029, right? Was that when Tavian would be going to the draft? If he were to be a 2 years, like he would set out 25, 26, start 27. So it'd be 29 draft. Yeah.
Yes.
And Julian would be the 27. One of those guys I think will be. And then I think I think Brady Edmonds will be.
That's just so far out there.
I know.
You got so much more bold than that. I was going to say, I think Julian Sayin will be a first-round draft pick. And I think, because the problem is it feels irresponsible to go, oh, they're going to have 3 straight first-round draft picks. Except they've had 3 straight first-round draft picks before.
Right.
I'll say this. I'll make a line of 1.5, because I am about 75% confident right now that Julian Sayin's going to be a first-round draft pick one day. It's because we now live in a world where being a smaller quarterback is not as relevant anymore, right? Kyler Murray was the number one pick all that a couple of years ago.
I cheated a little bit by saying him or Tavian will be one.
Right.
Give myself some room there. What could happen is Julian and Tavian both are, and then Brady isn't, but I'm still right because I said 2.
So you hedged your boldness of it. I will say, I don't know why I'm struggling to get there with Tavian, because he looks it. You look at him and you go, that dude looks like he's going to be a top 10 pick one day. But it's just, when you know the context, it's hard to just throw that there until you see what it looks like on a football field. And it's not like he had a great spring game, right? I'll say I think Julian.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, what if it's not? Okay, what if Tavian doesn't pan out? What if there's a transfer in there, though?
That's what I was going to say.
We talked about how that could be next in the cycle.
I was going to say 2, and I was going to name Julian Sayin, and it's either, and for me, I was going to say Tavian St. Clair or a transfer portal. That's what I'll put it at. Because
the Brady conversation, it is so early to project like a first round pick.
I mean,
I think he's got some of the size where I'm taking give me those tangibles with Ryan Day. I'll give you a first round pick.
Yeah,
but it is crazy. I mean, we're projecting like the 2030 NFL draft.
Oh, for sure. But it's also like, it's not like you said, hey, this 5'7" quarterback who can barely throw it 20 yards is going to be a first rounder just because Ryan Day got his hands on him. No, he's 6'4", 6'5" with an arm, and he's a 5-star. It's safe to do. You know what? Who else they did that with? Somebody looked at Trevor Lawrence and said, 6'6", can sling it, and he's going to play for the guy who just developed Deshaun Watson. I think that guy's going to be a first-round draft pick. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you end the hyperbole by comparing Brady Edmonds to Trevor Lawrence, who people thought was the best prospect since Andrew Luck. 614-350-3315. Trial, $3.99 after that. We are into our next series. It feels like we're doing a lot of series this summer. We like series here. We like continuity. Like Ryan Day, he likes continuity as well on the staff and with his players. State of the program, that was quarterback today. Tomorrow, we'll take a deep dive into the running back situation in Carlos Loughlin as the room heads into the future. It's a room made completely in Carlos Loughlin's image outside of one player. I think James Peoples is the only guy who is so I take back what I said. Sam Williams-Dixon also committed to Tony Alford originally. But a lot of this room is made in Carlos Loughlin's image now. What do we think of the room heading into 2025, but also what the future at running back at Ohio State could be? That'll be up next. This week is all offense with the State of the Program series, and next week we'll dive into the defensive stuff. 614-350-3315. Big Ten Media Days is right around the corner. For Stefan Krajisnik and Stephen Means, it's Buckeye Talk.